What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Bow Stamina Warden build. So out of the 5 different classes in the game, only 2 classes are really going to be up to be able to use a Bow build to its fullest potential. Those 2 classes are going to be the Wardens and the Nightblade. So today we're going to be focusing on the Warden, and the next build video will be focusing in on the Nightblade. So the Warden is going to be better suited for this double bow build because their main spam build, which is going to be Subterranean Assault, as well as Cutting Dive, are both able to be used at range, which really plays to the idea of the bow build. It's basically a stamina build that you're able to play at range, which basically allows you to do certain pieces of content that you might not necessarily be able to do otherwise because magic DPS are going to be preferable. So examples of this would be Asylum and Cloud Rest. You should be able to bring a bow build in place of a Magicka DPS. Now you will not have shields or anything like that compared to a Magicka DPS, but it will still allow you to play at range while still playing as a stamina DPS. So that's kind of the draw of the bow build. You're able to pull pretty similar levels to Magicka DPS while not giving up your kind of stamina identity, so to speak. So, just like our other build videos, we'll be going over gear, attributes, skills, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build. Go over a little bit behind the sort of substitutions that you can make to this build in case you don't have access to certain DLCs or expansions, because I am using some gear pieces from expansions and DLCs in order to kind of really focus in on basically optimize this build itself. And then we'll finish things off with a 6 million dummy parse. So you guys can get an idea of what the rotation looks like, as well as the DPS you can expect to pull running this build. So starting off first here with our gear. So in terms of monster helm sets, double bow builds really only have 2 options. Either going to be Velidreths or it's going to be Stormfist. Those are the only 2 stamina based monster helm sets that are able to proc and hit enemies at range. Velidreth is going to be stronger. We really don't necessarily need the additional regen from Stormfist, plus Velidreth. So Velidreth does win out because it has that additional weapon damage bonus as the 1 piece. The 2 piece I should say, does have a little bit of kind of situational awareness in order to make the most use out of it, because you will need to kind of aim your proc in order to make sure you gets hit. You hit the boss that way. Stormfist doesn't have that weakness because it will always proc on top of the boss. The weakness of Stormfist is if the boss moves out of the proc, then you basically have wasted that proc and you aren't dealing any damage with the monster helm set. So Velidreth, if you have access to Cradle of Shadows, is going to be the better choice, but if you don't have access to Cradle of Shadows, then Stormfist is really the only other base game helm option that you have. For our body, we're going with the Relequen. Relequen is obviously the strongest stamina set that's ever been released in the game so far, so we're still going to be using this, so you will need to have access to Somerset in order to farm this from Cloud Rest. I have the perfect version here, but you can go with the imperfect version. The difference is that max stamina bonus on the 5-piece. It's only going to be about maybe 1% DPS at most. It's going to be pretty small overall, so if you can't farm the perfected version, because that only drops from that +1 and up, then you can go with the imperfect version. That's perfectly fine. For other body pieces that you might want to consider running if you don't have access to Somerset would be War Machine if you have access to Morrowind. But if you only have access to the base game, you can run something like Hunding's Rage instead, or Vicious Ophidian. You can also buy Briarheart off of Guild Traders. That's not a bad set to run as well. So those are kind of your 3 main options in terms of base game sets if you don't have access to any of the DLC or expansions that way. For our second front bar set, we're going with War Machine. Stamina Wardens are able to use War Machine because our bear basically runs up and does its thing, so it is a very cheap ultimate to use. This also allows you to give Major Slayer to the range DPS, so Magicka DPS. A little bit harder to get Major Slayer out to those individuals, so it's nice to have this option here. Now War Machine does come from Halls of Fabrication, so you will need to have access to the Morrowind expansion in order to get this set, but this set is going to be the strongest set as your front bar set. One thing you have to keep in mind though is if you are running War Machine and you are running the Bear Ultimate, you have to make sure you're using the Bear Ultimate on your front bar in order to proc War Machine, because we are using a Maelstrom Bow on our back bar. Now, if you don't have access to War Machine, the only other set that I would recommend you pick up is going to be Briarheart. You could run Veiled Inheritance if you would like, but you will have to transmute jewelry pieces because it only comes in healthy, versus Briarheart, which can come in robust jewelry, so it's already kind of geared towards stamina DPS. Veiled Inheritance is probably the only other real option, so if you do have ability to transmute jewelry, then you can go with Veiled Inheritance. Briarheart, to me, for me, when I tested things out, pulled a little bit higher than Veiled Inheritance, so it's kind of up to you which one you want to run. Just remember that if you are running Veiled Inheritance, you will need to transmute your jewelry, so that's kind of a downside of running Veiled Inheritance versus Briarheart, which is pretty much already set to go as long as you have the robust pieces. For our bows, we do have Infused on both of our bows. We have a weapon damage enchant on our back bar, and then we have a poison damage enchant on our front bar. Now that Endless Hail will proc our weapon damage enchant on cooldown, you can basically take that weapon enchant, put it on our back bar. In terms of sustain, at least when I tested out the builds, as long as you have good orb support from your healers, you should be able to sustain this with Dubious Camoran Throne or Arteaum Takeaway Broth. You won't necessarily need that additional Absorb Stamina enchant. That being said though, if you do need that additional sustain, then you can replace the poison damage enchant or the weapon damage enchant with an Absorb Stamina enchant. I had better luck with the Absorb Stamina enchant on the back bar replacing the weapon damage enchant, but realistically you can go with either front or back bar Absorb Stam. Doesn't really make that big of a DPS difference either way. Now in terms of jewelry traits and armor traits and enchants, all of our armor pieces are going to be divines, and they all have max stamina enchants. I have 7 medium armor pieces here, but you can go with 6 medium and 1 heavy if you like the additional health. You can also replace one of your small pieces enchants with a health enchant instead of a stamina enchant, and again if you need the additional health there. For jewelry, going to be 3 Bloodthirsty for our traits. You can go with Infused if you would like, and then you have 3 weapon damage enchants. So you don't really need the additional sustain from any sort of regen glyphs, and Infused does beat out Robust by a pretty significant margin. So if you have the ability to transmute your jewelry, definitely go with Infused or Bloodthirsty. I would probably recommend, just because Bloodthirsty doesn't affect the bear, that you could probably go with 1 Infused, 2 Bloodthirsty, or even 2 Infused, 1 Bloodthirsty. It's kind of up to you what sort of content you're running and things like that. But for me, I'm just running 3 Bloodthirsty here for this parse here. Moving on to our character sheet. Now I am a Redguard, so the problem with Redguards is you will not be able to make use of that Adrenaline Rush passive, but if you ever decide to run a dual wield bow build or a two-hand bow build in the future, you will already be ready to kind of take advantage of the Adrenaline Rush passive. You can go with any of the other stamina inclined races, so the Wood Elves, the Khajiits, and the Imperials are 3 other racial options, but Redguards are probably going to be the strongest option and give you the most flexibility in case you ever do want to go dual wield or two-hand on one of your bars instead of going with double bow. So in terms of attribute points, I have 64 points into stamina. You can put a few points into health if you want the additional survivability. Again, it's kind of up to you and how comfortable you are with the content and your own personal survivability. Because you are playing at ranged, you do have a little bit more time to react to kind of mechanics that might happen. However, unlike magic DPS, you don't have access to a shield, so that does affect your survivability a little bit here. In terms of Mundus stones, we're still going with the lever. We still need additional penetration ever since the changes to Night Mother's Gaze and Thunderflame happened a couple of patches ago. The lever has pretty much been the go-to Mundus stone for all stamina DPS. Now in terms of food, I'm using Lava Foot here just to kind of mimic having orbs, but in terms of food, you should be running either Dubious Camoran Throne or Arteaum Takeaway Broth for the additional sustain. Can go with blue food if you would like. As long as you have very good orb support from your healers, you should be able to do pretty decently well with blue food. However, if you do want additional sustain, the additional kind of safety net there, then I would run Dubious Camoran Throne or Arteaum Takeaway Broth instead. So that's kind of up to you how you want to do that. That's all going to be dependent on your personal taste and your personal sustain problems if you have any. Now for our bars. Starting off with our front bar, I have Silver Leash here. This is here mainly for the weapon damage bonus here. You can replace this with Swarm if you'd like for the damage done bonus instead. It's kind of up to you which one you want to go for. Silver Leash does have a little bit of utility in that it acts as a chain, so you can help out your tank chaining things in if they do need that help. Then we have Cutting Dive, Subterranean Assault, Bull Netch, and Bird of Prey for the Minor Berserk, and then we have Wild Guardian as our ultimate. For our back bar, Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Challenge Acceleration. This is going to be our source of Minor Force. Now, if you don't have access to Somerset and therefore you don't have access to the Psijic skill line, then you can use Lightweight Beast Trap instead and just double bar Lightweight Beast Trap. That, if you do happen to do that, it will be a sustained loss because you'll have to cast it basically twice as often as you would with Rearming Trap. And Lightweight Beast Trap is not a cheap skill to use. The Lightweight Beast Trap does cost about 2600 stamina every 6 seconds, so it is going to be quite a additional drain on your sustain. So if you do have access to this, I would recommend getting Challenge Acceleration instead for your Minor Force. Lasts for a longer period of time, uses Magicka, so it doesn't affect your sustain as much. It does have a cast time associated with it, and I'll go over why this is going to be significant when we go over our rotation, so that's just something to bear in mind. Bird of Prey again for that Minor Berserk. And then we have Wild Guardian. We do need a double bar this. So again, Silver Leash is what I like to have down, but you can go with Swarm for the additional damage done passive. It's up to you which one you want to go for. And if you don't have access to Challenge Acceleration, then you would be double barring Lightweight Beast Trap for that Minor Force. Otherwise, you could ask a healer or a Magicka DPS or a tank, your off tank, to maybe run Stalwart Guard and guard you. That way you still have the Minor Force and without having to give up any sort of bar space. If you do happen to do that, then you can just stick with, you can still have Rearming Trap, Lightweight Beast Trap instead for the weapon damage boost, but it won't be as necessary anymore. You could just replace them with Animal Companion's abilities for the additional damage done passive boost. Now, for our champion points, CP cap is 810, gives us 270 points to put across each of our 3 different constellations. So starting off with our green CPs, I have 75 into Moon Cap and 75 into Tenacity, which gives us 120 points to put really wherever you'd like. Green CPs are kind of flexible, it really depends on kind of the con that you're running and things like that. You can go 100 Moon Cap, 100 Tenacity if you'd like. You won't be using any sort of heavy attacks, but it's nice to have a few points in Tenacity in case you do need to heavy attack for sustain that way. For our blue CPs, this is going to be pretty similar to our typical dual-wield bow stamina warden CP setup. The only real difference here is instead of running slashes, you basically have a fighter skill ability there instead. So again, not that much of a difference compared to a dual-wield setup. So 64 mighty, 28 piercing, 66 precise strikes, 37 thaumaturge, 66 master at arms, and 9 into physical weapons expert. Finally, our red CPs. This particular setup I have here is a one-size-fits-most approach. So basically, if you do need to adjust your CP for the content that you're running, then feel free to do so. This just is kind of a very generic red CP approach. So I have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick-Skinned, and 64 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. So that covers pretty much all of our build information. Now let's go ahead and talk about our rotation. So like I mentioned earlier, the rotation is pretty much identical to the Stamina Warden dual wield rotation. Your rotation is going to be centered around Subterranean Assault. You have a 3-second basically window to use abilities while you're waiting for a Subterranean Assault to happen. That's enough time for you to use 2 abilities normally. Now if you do have to recast Challenge Acceleration, because it does have a cast time associated with it, Challenge Acceleration counts as 2 abilities for the purposes of Subterranean Assault. So you can do Subterranean Assault, Challenge Acceleration, and then you can go right into another Subterranean Assault. This does mean that you will have to break up your backbar rotation a little bit here. And I do want to mention this because the Maelstrom Bow unique effect only takes place if you happen to get the tick on Endless Hail while you're on your Maelstrom Bow bar. So if you swap cancel out of your Endless Hail, you will not be getting that Maelstrom Bow unique bonus until you swap back to your back bar and have Endless Hail tick. It's not going to be that big of a deal, but it is going to be something you want to be mindful of. Now you can go with a static rotation in which you just finish off your back bar rotation and then you go back to your front bar and use Subterranean Assault. You will lose a little bit of DPS this way compared to a dynamic rotation, but it is a simpler rotation to maintain overall. So quick demonstration of the rotation on the dummy here. Just bear in mind again that if you are running War Machine on your front bar, you want to use the Bear Ultimate when you're on your front bar. Don't use it on your back bar because you will not get the Major Slayer bonus if you proc it on your back bar. Now, while you're doing this, just keep in mind that the bear does count as an ability for purposes of Subterranean Assault. Before you go into any fight, make sure you pre-buff with Challenge Acceleration and have your Netch out. I typically like to just completely start my back bar dots before going to Subterranean Assault. So I do 2 abilities, swap to my front bar, recast Subterranean Assault, and then do 2 abilities again between each Subterranean Assault. So because I did bar swap cancel out of Endless Hail, the ticks won't happen until I'm back on my back bar. That wasn't that big of a deal there because I happen to need to recast Caltrops. You can see here chunk acceleration count as 2. You can see here, based on this kind of rotation demonstration, that we're not really having that big of an issue with sustain. And that's pretty much the entire rotation there. So as you can see here, you're basically centering it around Subterranean Assault. 2 abilities, Subterranean Assault. 2 abilities, Subterranean Assault. The only time you will not be doing 2 abilities is if you have to re-up chunk acceleration. Typically speaking, I like to do Subterranean Assault, Chunk Acceleration, Subterranean Assault whenever I can. That being said though, you do want to make sure to maintain all the dots on your back bar as much as you can. So as much as you possibly can, try to maintain those dots there as best you can. Now we're going to go ahead and do a 6-man dummy parse so you guys get an idea of the DPS you're able to pull. Now, your bow, you do have a passive under the bow skill tree. Let's see, pull up the exact name. It's called Long Shots, which gives you a damage bonus with bow abilities the farther away you are. Now, the farthest away you'll be able to be while still being able to hit the enemy is going to be 20 meters because that is the range of Subterranean Assault. That is the shortest range of all of our abilities. So you have to be within 20 meters in order to use Subterranean Assault, so that is pretty much how far you want to be away from the enemy. Now, where the 6 million dummy is, this kind of coil of rope kind of is the 20 meter mark here, so you kind of want to be about this far away from the boss in order to make sure Subterranean Assault hits. Let's go ahead and get started here with this parse here. Make sure we are hitting those light weaves. We did miss a couple of weaves there. We do want to maintain our Hawkeye passive as best we can. Did mess that up a little bit there. As you can see here, this is a fairly dynamic rotation. I did have to go to my back bar to make sure that the Maelstrom Bow effect was proccing. And missing quite a few weaves here on this parse, so this parse probably isn't going to be quite as good as it should be. Alright, yeah, so that parse wasn't quite as good as it should have been. I was missing quite a few weaves here and there. And I did mess up my rotation a few times there, so I do have an earlier parse that I can show you guys that is more indicative of what you're able to pull here. So I only managed to pull about 45.7k or so, but I'll show you the earlier parse that I did. So this is what I managed to pull earlier. The exact same build, just a little bit tighter rotation. It was about 48k or so is what you can expect to get here. And do bear in mind that this does have Major Fracture and Minor Berserk built into their toolkit. So if you do want to compare this to like a Magicka Nightblade, just bear that in mind. You do want to compare bow builds to ranged builds, so Magicka DPS builds. You don't necessarily want to compare them to stamina builds, your dual wield builds, just because it's not a very fair comparison, because obviously dual wield builds are able to stand up in melee range and obviously have different toolkits. So that's just something you want to kind of keep in mind here. So compared to some Magicka DPS builds, you're pulling pretty comparable numbers to a lot of Magicka DPS. So if you really want to bring a bow build and replace a Magicka DPS, that's perfectly viable to do so. You are going to be a little bit shy of what Magicka Nightblade is able to pull on solo parses, but overall you are pretty much toe-to-toe with other Magicka DPS, with the added utility of whatever a stamina DPS is able to bring here. So you have the War Machine, you have Subterranean Assault for AoE Major Fracture, so that's something to keep in mind as well. So that is it for this build video. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.